the diaspora. Pleasant morning again. We are going to have a review this morning of activities which took place at La Soufriere over the weekend, and I am going to try to patch Professor in right away so that we can address the issues of the science first. Is he available as yet?
Yes, he is.
Yeah. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Professor. If we can just begin this morning, Professor, by taking a recap of the activities in particular, on the weekend yesterday, and then we look at where we are today.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see that we have some rain this morning. So, overnight. So, hopefully it continues. The volcano, like I said before, the volcano continues in this pattern of earthquake swarms, what we call long-period hybrid earthquake swarms. In other words, a lot of these events happening over a short period of time, just continuing. And these earthquake swarms are interspersed by, or concluded by, not sure they happen in between, by these explosive events. Yesterday at 4:49, I believe, we had the latest one. The gap between these events seems to be increasing. There's no clear, definitive pattern, but we clearly enter a period where you have breaks of different lengths. When I say breaks in which it appears not very much is happening physically at the volcano. It's still shaking a lot. That's why we have the earthquakes. But then these breaks, after these breaks, you tend to have an explosive event. These explosions so far have not been as vigorous as when the eruption started. They still create eruption plumes. They still have tremendous potential to produce pyroclasticos on the volcano itself. And because of the eruption plumes, they have the potential to put a lot of ash into areas which are occupied. Fortunately, the last set of them have actually gone towards the west, so that both Barbados and St. Vincent and Grenadines have not really had that much ash, if any, as the one yesterday did. We think this pattern of activity where you have earthquake swarms, explosion, earthquake swarms, explosion, will continue for some time. There's no indication that it's sort of stopping. If anything, it looks like the time period is increasing, and the explosions, you could say, sometimes they seem to be smaller, sometimes they generally seem to have a little bit less energy. So you get the feeling that whatever started this eruption going is, there's a certain amount of wane into it. That said, though, we don't know if there's a new batch of material that wants to come through, that's going to come through, so that even if, and this is what we might expect, even if, for example, in the coming weeks or so, it either stops, it's possible that it could grow a dome. Even if that happens, I don't think we would be thinking that we are yet, that it's possible that it could restart. When I say restart, that it could go into explosions again and you have a reset because a new batch would come through. So in summary, the activity continues as it has for most of the latter part of the week. And we really need to continue to monitor it and continue to be vigilant. Hopefully rain means that we could get rid of some of the ash and we could have a better day today and a better week, hopefully.
Professor, you speak of earthquakes. I know at one particular time, residents in particular in the red zones were feeling these earthquakes.
Yeah.
Are these felt close to the volcano only?
But the kinds of earthquakes that we have is unlikely to be felt. There are particular kind of earthquakes that are different than the ones that were felt by people. The ones that were felt by people are called volcano-tectonic earthquakes, and these are earthquakes that have a similar mechanism as the tectonic earthquakes which people feel. Tectonic earthquakes are the big earthquakes in a magnitude 4 and 5 and 6 that we feel from time to time. We often hear that they're offshore or somewhere might be close by St. Vincent. These are not VTs or volcano-tectonic earthquakes. These are earthquakes, we think, related to the movement of magma or the movement of fluid or gas, and they are unlikely to be felt even on the volcano. It would be unusual to have even a large enough hybrid or long-period event that will be felt. So no, the earthquakes shouldn't be felt by anyone because they are long-period hybrid earthquakes. But that said, we have had sometimes during this period, we have had the occasional VT. So far, the VTs that we've had are not sufficiently large in size to be felt. So again, it's possible to have a VT that you'll feel, but it's unlikely that you'll feel the hybrid or the long period events, which dominate the kind of earthquake activity that we have in between the explosive periods.
Yes, Professor. In your analysis, there are periods of heightened activities and there's a period of a lull.
Yeah.
Now, we were not able to move a good percentage of the animals in the red zone. And there are many farmers who are in the shelters who evacuated. And we have advised them that the red zone is still a no-go. We visited the areas on the windward side of the red zone on the weekend, and we recognize that a lot of the animals are still alive. And basically they need some caring. So what the government is doing is that we, in a very organized manner, we're using the vehicles from the Ministry of Agriculture to take feed and water to these animals, because the availability of grass definitely is an issue because of the heavy ash fall. Now, the farmers are becoming very anxious, and I'm wondering, on your advice, in these periods of the lull, whether or not we can, in an organized way, probably have a few farmers go into this area. I don't know what the advice is. As for now, we're advising persons not to go into the red zone at all.
Right. I mean, once one understands that there is always a risk to going on the volcano, and anywhere in the red zone is always going to be a dangerous place. Once one understands that, if the pattern continues that we're seeing, there would clearly be periods when not very much is happening in the volcano. And that if one can, if you can organize it such that, the people check with the observatory or the parties, you have to organize it such that maybe you have groups of people who are in touch with the observatory who know, who can contact us or who can be contacted if something changes. It can be organized such that you can minimize the risk to people, and therefore you can do certain kinds of activity. I think it is a possibility. It's something that can be looked at, that can be organized, and it would make sense to do so, given what you've just described. But that said, it really needs to understand that, people need to understand that even when doing that, there is always a risk. It's just that what you're trying to do is minimize the risk by doing activity in a particular manner. So yes, it's something that could be considered that can be done in an organized manner. But you have to, as I said, you have to bear in mind, you have to trade off between the risk versus the benefits of doing that. And it's something that I would recommend you work closely with the observatory in terms of managing that kind of activity.
Yes. The second question, there's significant anxiety, of course, as you will anticipate in the farming community, farmers from the red zone and even from the orange zone as well, as it pertains to the future of heavy ashfall. And It is something that we are advising persons. It may be a bit too soon to attempt to do any reparatory work or any work on your farms, because it could be an exercise in futility. You can go into your farms and you could start replanting in, let's say, the orange zone, and then you can have significant ashfall, and basically your work, you would have to do it all over. What is the level of uncertainty in terms of the future of heavy ashfall?
It's difficult to quantify that, but there are ways in which one can sort of get a better idea of that. And it's not the ashfall to the south. It's related, yes, fundamentally to what the volcano is doing. So if you have an explosive event, you need an explosive event to generate the ashfall. So that's the motivating factor. But it's also related to the meteorological conditions, where the wind is blowing. So that one can come up with models that tell you what is the chances of having a certain kind of wind pattern that will generate the conditions for ash to come to the south. And there are people, actually, we've recently been reaching out to colleagues in the UK who do that kind of modeling to get a better idea of, if an event happens, can it come south? Is it going to come south? So I think there's some work that can be done in terms of trying that uncertainty. There's not an absolute number that I can give you in terms of how unsure it is. The most I can say that if generally, in most cases, I think the ash goes offshore. In rare cases, it comes to the south. The reason you had so much ash at the beginning of the eruption is because of the nature of the activity that happened. The volcano went into a very intense period of explosive events that generated a significant amount of ash and very high ash plumes that went high into the atmosphere. And once you do that, everywhere on the island could potentially have ash. The kind of activity that you have now, the way in which you will get ash is if you have a southerly wind, a dominantly southerly wind. And as you see, since we have gotten into sort of the events that are more volcanic, more discrete, less jetting constantly of ash and material from the volcano, you've had less occurrence of ash going to the south. So I'll say it's difficult to quantify the uncertainty. I'll say also that if the activity as it is continues, I think there's a lower chance of having ash to the south than you had at the beginning. And thirdly, for you to get to the kind of activity that you had at the beginning, you will need, we think, to have a new batch of magma coming through. So all indications are that there is probably, and you can't put a number in it, there is probably marginally a lower likelihood of having ash to the south, given the current kind of activity they have. But that activity pattern could change. So I think one of the things that could be considered, and I've mentioned it before, is to work with people in the agriculture department, faculty of agriculture, the Ministry of India, at UWE at St. Augustine, who have done work on rehabilitation of land that have been affected by ash. There are people who are knowledgeable about that. So there may be things that you can do now, quite apart from you're talking about replanting and stuff like that, things that you can do with the conditions as it is to perhaps get the land to a state where it would be better prepared for the time when you can fully get into production. Because as it is now, with the heavy amount of ash that you have in the land, I suspect that it will be difficult for crops and for plants to sustain themselves without doing something about, I'm not an agronomist or somebody who's supporting agriculture, but it might be difficult given the volume of material that you have. You'll have to deal with that volume first before you get to this stage of production, perhaps, in some areas. So I think that's some of the things that you have to do. So I'm not sure if I completely...
yes, because from all cursory analysis, between the areas, for example, Dry River, all the way up to Sandy Bay, we saw instances where there were 2 feet of ash on the ground. Now we are in the process of testing the elements that are in the ash, and it's something that we can work together on, because we're doing some work to send some of the ash to Trinidad and Tobago so that we can get an analysis done. Now, the idea is that, and this is from a preliminary sense, if we can probably plow it in using the tractors, because as you correctly said, to plant something in 2 feet of ash, it's not going to be productive. That's what the agronomists have advised. But before we do anything, we need to get the analysis done in Trinidad and Tobago and get the results. I don't know if you have any examples of what pertained in Montserrat as the recovery efforts and the replanting after heavy ash fall, probably months or even a year, in areas that were severely affected by ash fall in Montserrat.
Not directly, but I suspect that you through your through ECS and places like that, you can get advice from the ministry in Montserrat. That said, you should bear in mind that the material that was produced in Montserrat in terms of the ash, the composition of the rock is slightly different than ours. We are more what we call basaltic, and they are more closer to andesite. So slightly different. So and the conditions are slightly different. But I think the best thing would be to reach out to the Ministry of Agriculture there. The thing I would say is that often, I mean, things rebuild, the land rebuilds itself very fast. really what it needs is a good rainy season, and it changes rapidly. So I suspect that a lot would change after the rainy season have passed this year, and that the land itself and the ability to rehabilitate the land would be significantly improved once you start getting some rain. So, I mean, I'm very positive about the effect that the ash would have. It actually, in the end, the ash, although it's a nuisance now and it's very thick, the ash is going to have a positive effect in terms of the agriculture in St. Vincent, because the minerals that you have, they do, I mean, that's the fact that we have great land for agriculture and conditions here, right? It's partly to do with the volcanic materials. So I think in the end it will be very positive, but I think moving in that direction where you research it and find out that's a good idea.
Yes, it's actually very interesting that we were going into a dry spell just before we had the first explosive eruption. And I don't know if you could shed some light on the impact of all those dust particles by the explosive eruption and the impact on rainfall. Because some persons are saying that it may be anticipated that it can be dry, and that can have the impact of creating almost a microclimate in and around the island because of the heavy ash presence in the air.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I know that much about it. I do know that in the fine ash particles, the very fine particles tend to get, they get very high into the atmosphere and they get lost. The thing that you're speaking about is the suspended ash, the remobilized ash. I don't think that would affect too much the local climate because that's affected by more things above. And I think what's going to happen is that once you have a little bit of rain, in fact, like today, when you had a little bit of rain, where I'm here in the north, the haziness that we normally see from the remobilized ash is already gone. So that changes quite rapidly. I think the thing that might have affected sort of more the creation of clouds and things like that is the particles that went higher up. And I think those have more or less gone with the wind already. But that said, that's not my area of expertise, so I'm kind of just largely guessing more than anything else.
Yes, the issue of the pyroclastic flows, because I have the responsibility for forestry as well.
Right.
Could you explain to us like what areas were mainly affected, because the persons who are listening who would like to be up to speed with that information.
Right. So I mean, from what we see, the area of most devastation on the volcano are the areas that go from sort of, you could take an area from sort of Wallabu, Richmond area, and you on the west coast, and you go north all the way to just south of Balen, north of Laraka, between Laraka and Balen. I mean, I'd say half in between, just north of Laraka. And then if you take, that's the coastal area, and if you take a sort of make that into a triangle that ends up at the equator, those are the areas that are affected in the greatest way. And when I say the effect is that up at the top of the volcano, sort of, I would guess the top 2 or 3, probably the top 1 or 2 miles, probably a little bit less than that, there is almost total destruction of plant life. There's a lot of ash. There are no trees. If there are any trees, there are stumps of trees. The leaves have been broken out. But then as you go lower down, you might see a few more trees. Most of the lower level, plants and plant life is totally destroyed and covered in ash. But you may see some rare trees every now and then. I suspect they're just really the barks, and they will eventually die. So those are the areas where the forest essentially has been destroyed to a large extent. It will have to be rebuilt. When you move north now from Balen, in fact, Balen, last time I saw Balen, it was fairly, the forest was still there. It was in good condition. If you go from Belen all the way around to Fancy and then you're coming back south, I think the forest is still largely intact as you get to the lower end, as you get outside from the crater itself. And it's only when you start coming back south, past, Sandy Bay and places like that, you start getting sort of more of the kind of devastation to the coastal areas, close to the coastal areas. It's not clear what's happened higher up. So the maximum area that has been, the area that's been devastated in the most is really the southwest, the southwestern area going all the way up to the sort of northwest. The rest of it is mainly ash in terms of the pyroclastic density currents. So the area that just identified, the area that has been totally, new deposits has been wiped out completely, and that's the area where the forest would need to rebuild.
Yes. Whilst every eruption is different, but you can have trends. In 1902, 1979, and what you're seeing now, you would have seen dome formations at the end of an eruption or a lake being formed. What pertained in 1902, 79? And of course, it's too early to predict what was going to happen now. But in terms of the formation of a dome, I remember going to La Soufriere as a youngster, and persons who had gone up to La Soufriere, let's say 1982, would have witnessed either a smaller dome, and I used to hear a person saying that it is growing. Of course, I couldn't understand or fathom what they were speaking about, but I could just imagine if there's a dome there, let's say, starting to grow in 2023, and I go back there in 2040, that it would have grown. It will be growing. Could you explain that a bit, and then we'll take the call in terms of how have we historically transitioned from an eruption to a crater lake or the growth of a dome before moving into a quiet period?
You could think of these eruptions, So you can think of these eruptions, and eruptions generally are being driven by gas-rich magma that has come from below. That, for whatever condition, the conditions has become such that the chamber in which they are derived from have become what we call overpressured. It's developed sufficient pressure that it can push upwards and move to the surface. And that gas-rich magma will then punch a hole at the surface, generally create a crater, a hole through which magma would vent. And generally, once it's gotten rid of a large amount of its gas, it then starts moving slow. What we say, its viscosity or its stickiness increases. And once that starts happening, the gas, the gushing initially, when it's gas rich, gets rid of a lot of the gas. But then once it starts moving slower, the gas comes out slower. It eventually cools a lot. Well, not so much cools, but because it's moving slow, as it moves slow, the top part of it, it's sort of, you can think of it, the part that is closest to the surface, cools down, and it begins to form, it gets stickier, it becomes more like rock, and it could potentially form a dome, right? And often, in Soufriere terms, that's one of the ways in which it has ended this eruption with this dome forming. So this dome gets bigger and bigger, and the mass of the dome, and also because it doesn't have so much gas-rich magma below it, then essentially forms a cap that stops the eruption, and that's the end. And in a sense, that's what happened in 79 years, to a large extent. The gas-rich part went on, you had the explosive period, and then a dome ended. It ended with a dome, which was a part that didn't have so much gas, and therefore stiffened, created a mass of rock that effectively plugged it. In 1902, it didn't create a dome. It ended with a crater that then, when water falls, when rain falls, and there's a lot of rain up there, the crater essentially becomes a collecting point, where a cauldron where water collects, and you have a dome, a crater lake being formed. So the lakes form when the gas-rich magma is exhausted without having any more left to come up, or else it actually came up, but it didn't quite reach the surface. So effectively, it seals the bottom of the opening and creates the conditions for the lake to form. In cases where it has enough gas-rich magma still to push all the way up, it then cools, and you might have, or you have enough magma, the gas is gone, it's the gas, it doesn't have too much gas, it then forms a dome. You have a dome at the end, and in 79 that happened. So those are the conditions of the determinant of whether or not you have a crater versus whether or not you have a dome, and in fact, whether the eruption ends with crater or dome has to a large extent with the amount of gas-rich magma you have, and how it gets rid of that gas. What we really need in eruptions is that we need the gas to come out, easily. We need the magma to degas without pressure building up that sufficiently that it then explodes. And in fact, coming back to what's happening now, I think the working model, if you want to call it, in other words, how we think about what's happening currently scientifically, is that this gas-rich magma that gushed out at the beginning of the eruption, it got rid of a lot of the gas that came up during that first period. That's why it was so vigorous. It was so vigorous because it was under pressure and it had a lot of gas in it and it was really exploding. Now, a lot of it is gone. So now, as a lot of it is gone, the driving force is less, so that it's moving, it's degassing freely still, but it's moving a little bit slower. And if it starts doing that, effectively it starts stiffening up and it starts stopping itself from moving. And what we think is happening over the last couple of days is that it's stiffening up and it's stopping itself from moving. It's building up enough pressure that it then fragments and it causes an explosion. So in a sense, it's kind of trying to form a dome, but then conditions are changing and it exploded the dome. If this is correct, what we think is correct, what is likely to happen is that at the end of the eruption, you're going to probably have, well, at the end of this phase of the eruption, certainly you will have a dome. Whether or not this is the end in terms of that's it and the eruption is done, something that we all would like to see. We'll have to wait and see, because it's possible that there may be another pulse of material that is below the surface, that be deeper down, that we haven't seen yet, that tries to come through, and really is whether or not it gets through this cap that would now be there. One interesting thing that we determined from this eruption is that Soufriere seems to be very good at locking in gas. It's not a volcano that has a lot of pathways for gas to come to the surface. Because of the nature of the volcano, we have a mountain that is built up of layers of hard rock and loose material. And the hard rock seems to be really, really hard. So they're very good at tapping the gas in. And the gas is only able to come out through very small pathways, when the opening was at the beginning, where the dome was coming out, that was the only place we saw really, truly volcanic gases coming out. A lot of the other areas is just steaming. So if a dome comes up and captures again, it means that it's going to stop the gas from coming out. And one scenario is that it will stop the eruption. The other one is that it will cause pressure to build up sufficiently that it will get into that. I sort of give you a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's really good. It's really good. Now, going around in the different communities and meeting persons who basically lived through 1979, they are all saying that what happened now is totally different. It's, in fact, it's more intense. It's far worse in terms of the impact. And I can recall you noting very earlier that when you compare what is taking place now, it's more of a 1902 type. I don't know if I had gotten it right.
Right.
Yes. What basically are the comparisons between now and 1902?
Right. So I don't think it's quite gotten to sort of the volume of material that was produced in 1902 yet. But I think the comparison was really to do with the intensity of the explosions, particularly the beginning of the eruption. The intensity of those explosions that happened from Friday until about Sunday was nothing similar to 79. It was much more intense, and it was closer essentially to what some of the explosions and some of the periods that you had in 1902. So that's where the comparison comes. But in terms of the total amount of material, and we don't think it's quite there. And volcanologists use different measures to quantify the size of an eruption. So you could think of it in terms of vigor of activity, in terms of force, in terms of explosivity. It certainly was more so closer to 1902 than 1979, because none of the 1979 eruptions, explosions were bigger than some of the explosions that you had at the beginning. They were closer to the explosions you have had since then, like the one on the 13th, the one the other evening. Those are the kind of size of explosions you had in 79. And the people see that because you could see the effect that it had. You didn't have so much ash in the south. You didn't have so much of the areas devastated. For example, in 79, the pyroclastic flows only went on some parts of Rabaca, Larakai, the higher parts of Wallabu, and things like that. Right now, within a week of the eruption, you've had pyroclastic flows that have gone down to the sea in Wallabu, Roseau, all of the valleys, all the way up to Larakai. That is closer to what happened in 1902. But as I said, it's not quite there yet, I think, because in 1902, the destruction in terms of the volcano itself was much more extensive. So while now the pyroclastic flows and the damage to a large extent is still in the valleys along the area that I spoke about. I mean, the forest is damaged and destroyed to a large extent. In 1902, you would have had that, and you would have had really much more deposition of ash in those areas. So you had in a sense, in 1902, the landscape from, say, Richmond all the way north to Larakai and beyond was just covered with like a moonscape with just ash. There was nothing, no trees sticking up. There was a huge amount of ash and debris. We haven't gotten to that stage yet, and we hope we don't get to that stage. But certainly, I agree with people. I mean, if you lived through 79, you would have seen that what we saw at the beginning was certainly much more explosive and much more dynamic and different than 79.
Yes, I remember walking along Garden Street in Trinidad, where I went to law school, and there was the research unit on the left-hand side of the road there.
Yes.
and I used to.
You didn't come to visit us, did you?
I didn't know you were there, and I remember every morning passing there and saying, I wonder what work is going on there and what recent information. That was between 2003 to 2005.
Right.
Yes. Now, I'm using that as the background because I know that you place a lot of equipment on different parts of the summit and different areas are in and around the volcano. And that was before the eruption. Now, in terms of damage, wear and tear, what are the sorts of damage and wear and tear you think that you have experienced? Because I don't know if everything is still working. I'm just asking in general.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, your question gave me a chance to really, to big up the team that work at Seismic. Because when I came up initially, I came up with Lloyd Lynch and Ian Juman, and they worked closely with Cameron and Price at the Super Monitoring Unit to put in what is the core of the monitoring network, which allows us to do what we're doing now. They put in the seismic instruments, and we put in stations at 2 stations on the mountain, one right at the summit, one at a place called Wallabu. We put in stations along the periphery, Fancy, Owea, Georgetown, and we then had a network that moved from essentially one station, because then it was just Belmont, to one that had at one time, I think, 8 or 9 stations. You asked about the damage and destruction. And before I go from that, I mean, it was a lot of work. It meant physically carrying stuff up the mountain. It meant working in areas that were hard. On one night, we were using a helicopter, and the guys in them got stranded because the helicopter dropped them off, and it couldn't get back in. And they hadn't prepared to walk out. So they had to essentially walk up the volcano and then walk back down again in the dark. And that's his stuff. So, much appreciation for them for that. So damage. I think we've been fortunate in that so far, we've lost, as I speak, I'm looking at the records, and we have 3 stations out. And we think it's only one of them is actually damaged by the volcano. The one that is within probably less than a mile from the summit. If you go up the summit on the windward side and you go around to a place we call Table Rock, and you continue around a little bit further until you reach sort of the southern side and go down a ridge, which is probably about 200 or 300 meters from the rim. That's where that was. Unfortunately, we think that's where quite a few of the pyroclastic flows that went in the direction of Rabaca, basically it's on a ridge, and I think the pyroclastic flow go down both paths, right?
Yes.
Now, we think it might be damaged, but we lost it earlier than that, because the solar panels which power it were covered in ash, and of course, we couldn't go to clean the solar panels because it was already erupted. So that's the only station we think is actually physically damaged. We don't have the other 2, but we don't have the other 2 mainly because of power issues. So the one in Fancy is largely because there's an issue with power at Fancy. That is power to the communications link that brings us in. So the station is working still, but we can't get the data in because of power to the mechanism to bring it in to us here in Belmont. And then the one in Owe, we think is a similar thing, that it has to do with power for the communication. So it's possible, luckily, that we have all of the seismic stations that we put in apart from one. In terms of the other stations, though, as people know, we had put in a station on the southwestern side to look at failure of the crater wall. We put in this EDM, and we had a camera. Well, that went within the first explosion, because that was right at the rim. So that, the camera was quite useful until the night before the first explosion. And the EDM reflector already was having a hard time with the conditions up there, and I think it's gone. We don't have any evidence of that, but it's right in the rim, so that's gone. The other stations that we have, similarly, we have the GPS stations at Fancy, so that's affected by the power issue. Apart from that, there are two other stations that we would have occupied that we didn't have equipment there, but we would have gone back to put equipment. That's the one at Table Rock, which is again at the summit. And then there's a one at a place called Jacob's Well, halfway up the summit. Yes. So for obvious reasons, we have not gone to the volcano because we think it's too risky. As you saw yesterday, we were monitoring, and yes, we know we're into this period where you could have explosions, but we didn't know exactly when the explosions are going to be. So it would be foolish for us to go up to the summit at this time. And as I said, your question gave me the chance to make that point, that it is absolutely foolish.
Yes, because I'm a member of the Christian Council. A member of the Christian Council just sent that question to me to basically reiterate that point.
Dotish to do that. People talk about bravery, and to me, somebody is brave when you're aware of the risk that you put yourself to, and because of because of your job or because of the need to contribute to society in a fundamental way, you still take the action, or you need to save your family or something like that. So you're aware of the risk. You know you could be killed, or you know you could be hurt, but you still do it. That's a brave person. A brave person is not somebody who goes up to the mountain, who don't understand the risk, putting themselves and their parties at risk, and the people who might have to rescue them. That person is not brave. To me, that person is just simply dotish. So I would suggest that actions like that is not sensible. At this time, you're a minister of government. At this time, I think for me, people in St. need to be brave to what we have to face. We have to face a country in which we will have tremendous destruction because of the volcano. And we have to be brave to face the circumstances. We have to be very brave to realize that if we want to live in this land that is really beautiful, we have to deal with the volcano, we have to deal with the hazards. We have to be brave to protect our family. That is brave. We're up the mountain at this point in time where you could be killed, and where you could get people which you killed, or you could inspire people who see you and think that that is a sensible thing to do the same thing. That is not brave, people. That is dotish. That's what I would call it. I'm sorry if I offend anybody in using that kind of language.
No, Professor. Because a question came in from a member of the Christian Council to basically reiterate to citizens not to venture there, and you basically brought it out before me even going there.
I had that one to Minister.
Yes. No. In many persons' minds, they're basically asking. Persons are looking for certainty in an uncertain period. Yeah. And of course, persons are anxious. There's been disruptions, displacements in all the factors of production. Land has been disrupted, labor, capital, foreign direct investors. And I think that the only general comparison that we have is what basically took place in Montserrat. And persons are wondering. I mean, it may not even be a good comparison, but they're saying, how long did Montserrat take before it returned to a state of normalcy? Is Montserrat still erupting? What's happening there? Can we get some guide? It's very difficult to have a guide, but for persons who are asking, I know that there are a lot of students who are listening to this program, and a lot of students, I mean, it will be an excellent opportunity if you're a CXC or A-level student to do plate tectonics as your number one question, and not weather. But there are persons who would like to know, what was it like in Montserrat? How long it took to return to a state of normalcy?
Yeah, well, I think the comparison in Montserrat, while it is up because of a volcano, it's different because Montserrat fundamentally is different than St. Vincent in the context that the development and the developed area in Montserrat was inverse. So it's like if our capital in the context of Montserrat was in Georgetown or in even further in Charlottesville. So Montserrat, its main development was on or very close to the volcano. So it meant that in terms of the disruption that the volcano caused, it was even greater. Our main development is in the south. So there's a lot that we could do in the country while the volcano is doing what it's doing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the kind of volcanism, the kind of way in which the volcano is erupting in Montserrat, ours operate differently. We tend to have eruptions that go on for shorter periods of time. So therefore, the disruption that will be caused by this volcano is going to be likely much less than the disruption in terms of impact continually of the volcano on people's lives than in Montserrat. Montserrat's eruption is still considered by the scientists monitoring it at the Montserrat Volcano Observatory, who are giving tremendous support to us with this eruption. Montserrat eruption is still considered, given what they have seen, to be ongoing. They are still having signs and signals that is coming out from the monitoring that suggests that it's not quite settled back yet. But in terms of the most intense period, Montserrat's most intense period was perhaps went on for about 2 or 3 years. We are very unlikely to have that. We are likely to have something that is more of the order of months, perhaps, close to a year, if so long. In 1902, I was making a comparison. 1902, this is similar to 1902, not quite yet. But 1902 went on for about a year. But the way in which it went on was that it wasn't like it was constantly doing something. It was more like what we have now, where you had periods when you had explosions and periods when it was apparently quite quiet. And most of the ash that happened in the south happened, intermittently. It wasn't like you constantly had ash. In the case of Montserrat, essentially you had a volcano that, first of all, was erupting right next to the capital. And they had a volcano that put out a lot of ash right next to the capital, right next to the area where they have the main farming, agriculture, infrastructure, everything was there in the south. So the disruption that it caused was much more. In terms of going back to normal, I think once they made a serious decision to shift towards the north in Montserrat, and understandably that decision was hard to make because, if you think of it, if we had the same thing, if you had to tell people in St. Vincent that Kingstown and the southern part of St. Vincent suddenly have a volcano and they have to move to the north, that would be extremely difficult. Nobody wants to do that. So in the case of Montserrat, it took a long time for that decision to be made. So therefore, I think the extent to which the disruption caused by the volcano was felt was affected by that too, not only the volcano. In our case, I have been saying for some time, and we've been saying here at Seismic for some time, that once the volcano is erupting, you need to leave it alone. So don't think, as much as you can, you need to find a way in which you can live in the south. For those people who are here, don't be thinking now that you're going to go back tomorrow and next week and that. Think like you're in for a long haul, right? I'm hoping that it might not be so, because even if it stops erupting now, it might be a little while before certainly the monitoring team is confident that it's safe to go back. That's the first thing. Secondly, the impact that it has had on the land would require rebuilding. So even in terms of moving back to utilize the land, even if it stopped, there will be some time. So the best thing is yes, you could use the Montserrat example, but I'm saying that the Montserrat example is probably not so apt because it's less amount of time. It's a positive thing. But to think about how can we sustain life and livelihoods in the southern part of the country for a little bit longer than we would like, yes, for at least months, right? Not weeks, not next week, not next week after that. We're thinking months, And if we do that, then if it's less than that, then we can move back faster. If it's more than that, then we have built the foundation upon which we could sustain that while the volcano is doing. Because as long as the volcano is capable of producing explosive eruptions, it will be difficult for people to live there safely. So therefore, I think that's how we have to think here and come up with solutions for that. Come up with solutions that deal with the ash that might happen again, water supply, that kind of thing. Once we do that, I think we should be good, and we should be positive that this is eventually the volcano is going to go back to going to become the beautiful place that it was where we go for Easter Monday and that kind of thing. We might end up with a crater lake. We might end up with a nice dome. They are a fantastic attraction for tourism, for various things. Yes. And of course, now that the whole world knows about Soufriere, we could capitalize on that. There's some largely positive elements. It's just that we have to rough it out for these times. It's going to be tough. Going to be adjustments. We just have to do that. That's why when I talk about bravery, that is brave. You have to be brave like that.
Yes. Okay. I don't know if you have any parting words. I have just a few announcements to make, but those are touching and concerning agriculture primarily.
Yeah.
So I will give you a minute or so to wrap up, and I will basically continue after.
Right. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I just want to reiterate to people that you have a monitoring team here that's going to keep a close eye on the volcano. I happen to be the face at this point in time. It's going to change at different times. but we have a large team that it's not me alone, it's not three of us alone, that's monitoring the volcano, keeping a close eye on it. So therefore, Vincentians need to be confident that you have a set of scientific people here who are going to be giving you advice soundly in terms of what you should or should not do. My sound advice to you is to learn to live in the South for the time being. My sound advice to you is not to go up on the mountain. As I said, I use a term, and I hope people remember that term. Use it to the person who's doing it. It's dotish. My sound advice to you is to be brave, not to be dotish. Live in the South, keep safe, and we should be good.
You're sounding real, Vinci, there, comrade.
Professor, you're trending already.
All right.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day and continue to do the excellent work. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
All right,
yes.
bye-bye.
Professor, thank you. All right, Ministers, over to you.
Yes, I really want to thank Professor for the excellent work that he is doing and his team. And I just want to use the remaining few minutes to address a few issues in agriculture. And first of all, I want to address the livestock subsector. On Friday last, we launched a program to assist livestock farmers throughout the country with animal feed. Because of the heavy ash cover, a lot of animals have not been able to get the grass available because the pastures are definitely affected. And there are several points throughout the country, and they were advertised. And I'm aware that close to 1,500 farmers registered for the support as it pertains to livestock feed. These farmers, some farmers received, and others will be getting their feed on Tuesday, which is tomorrow. The feed mill wasn't able to produce the quantities that we needed. We have allocated the sum of $250,000 towards the purchasing of feed, and we were only able to collect about $75,000 worth. I think we have a caller. Okay. The second issue has to do with the launch of the food package program that has been established, and it started last week, Thursday. And at the Lacroix buying depot, farmers who are willing to sell produce to the government for repackaging purposes to be distributed in boxes to different persons in different communities who are now food vulnerable, they can do so. This will take place between Monday to Thursday, of each week. Farmers are asked to prepare these products in terms of having them washed and take them there. It's basically, it's similar to what pertained in the Love Box initiative. I want to take this opportunity also to thank the government and people of Guyana. Yesterday, I witnessed the offloading of tons of fresh produce from Guyana, mainly melons, pineapple, and a lot of pumpkins. And these were all sent to the different shelters around St. Vincent. And there are persons who locally are growing fresh produce and assisting the shelters. So there are persons, there are farmers who will participate in the program of selling produce to the facility there at Lacroix for repackaging. But I want to really thank all those farmers who volunteered and brought produce and made it available at no cost. There is a caller now? Yes.
Yes.
Good morning, caller.
Yes. Is Minister Caesar available?
Yes, please, he is.
Yes, Sir Louis. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. I seem to understand. Yes, hello?
Go right ahead, Minister.
Yes, that I seem to understand that Dr. Robertson is saying that in Montserrat, the period of uncertainty and instability remained there for about 3 years.
Yes.
Now, he said in St. Vincent, it would last for about a year or maybe even more. The question is, if that is so, does that mean that the Modern Diagnostic Center and the Smart Hospital in Georgetown, those institutions will be out of commission for at least 1 year?
Okay, well, what he basically said from a general standpoint is that we should try to see how we can live in the South as much as possible.
Yes.
And to have a state of normalcy in living in the South. But that he will be able to tell us how soon we can return to a state of normalcy in the North. He said that it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be a year. It's very uncertain. But at the end of the day, what we must try to do now is to see how normal we can live on the island living in the South. So I take it that the predictability about disruptions in the North right now is still high, and it is too early to make a decision. However, as policymakers, we have to create levels of certainty. And the question that you raise, because those are two very important institutions, I am aware that a lot of the services have already moved to the South, and it's being operationalized in the South. The question is, how soon do we repatriate to the North? And that is something that we have to await his advice.
Thank you.
Yes. And definitely, that is the question that is going to be on our minds as policymakers, the issue of land use. Because a significant portion of the flat lands in St. Vincent and the Grenadines reside in the north of the Rabaca River. And we have a large cadre of farmers also there. I know that 98% of the arrowroot produced in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is produced in that area as well. So that is an industry that has been hit very hard, and we have to see how we are going to address the way forward. I'm also aware that the cocoa subsector has been significantly affected, and a lot of the new cocoa plantations that we have are also located in the red zone. So these are issues that we have to address going forward.
We have another caller, Minister.
Yes, we have another caller. Pleasant morning.
Hello, good morning. Roboto?
Yes, good morning.
Yeah, relocation and reconstruction in the South, it would be very vital, especially now, knowing the uncertainty of what's going to happen in the North. And so we mentioned a while ago about the hospital out there. Can we fast forward the plan to establish the modern hospital in Annisvale? Is this a good opportunity to put everything in place to have that established? Thank you.
So I just want to thank the caller for the comment, and as I noted earlier, that as policymakers, the advice from the scientists about having life.
This is NBC from studios at Richmond Hill in Kingston. Prime Minister Gonsalves has started his address to the United Nations, so we will take you to the address.
On the enhancing of cooperation between the United Nations in initiating this debate on the enhancing of cooperation between the United Nations and regional, sub-regional organizations. This subject is of immediate relevance to my country in the context of a massive natural disaster against the backdrop of the many-sided challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic and the predicted active Atlantic hurricane season that begins in 6 weeks' time. Please permit me a little latitude for a minute or two. Mr. President, for 11 days now, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has been in the throes of a series of explosive volcanic eruptions on the island of St. Vincent. As a consequence, nearly 1/5 of the island's population has had to be evacuated to safer areas. A monumental challenge of humanitarian relief, including security considerations and recovery and reconstruction, face us. Without effective cooperation between our country, the United Nations, and our regional, sub-regional organizations, our life and living would be wholly unbearable. Without an enhancement of this cooperation, the relief effort would be stymied and the prospects for our recovery and reconstruction would be dismal. The United Nations and its agencies have been actively at work, and the personal leadership of my friend, the Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, has been outstanding. The Caribbean Community, CARICOM, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the Regional Security System, the ALBA, the Association of Caribbean States, and their allied regional agencies have been at the forefront with their magnificent efforts. Still, much more is required to be done. Across our land, the faces of men and women are strained and anxious. They are hurting badly. The global community is being summoned to action to our aid in the name of humanity and in accord with the United Nations Charter. And the global community cannot allow itself to make haste slowly. Tomorrow, under the auspices of the United Nations, a global appeal fund for St. Vincent and the Grenadines would be launched. Be generous in your solidarity. Turning now, Mr. President, more specifically to conflict-affected settings, it has become a ringing truth that regional institutions in concert with the United Nations are often best suited to facilitate the Pacific settlement of disputes through mediation, confidence building, observation and verification missions, and other measures to promote stability, build trust, and create an environment conducive to development. Indeed, any dispute that is likely to endanger international peace and security should first be addressed through these peaceful means with the assistance and participation of relevant regional arrangements as enshrined in the UN Charter. Mr. President, let us restate foundational principles. Security is, at its very core, a collective endeavor that can only be achieved as parties build trust and stable relationships. In this regard, lasting peace can never be imposed. It must emerge organically from among all relevant stakeholders. St. Vincent and the Grenadines believes that regional arrangements such as ASEAN, the African Union, and our own Caribbean community, CARICOM, are often better placed to support peace processes than those entities that are far removed from the unique and specific histories, cultures, politics, and material circumstances of development. The Security Council is always required to lend its full support and encouragement to all regional mechanisms and refrain from any actions that may circumvent or undermine the legitimate role of regional bodies. We welcome the ongoing efforts of the Secretary General and his special envoys and special representatives to enhance the cooperation between the United Nations and various regional and sub-regional organizations. The convening platform of the Peacebuilding Commission also proves useful in providing a coherent, multi-stakeholder strategy to assist conflict-affected countries to overcome their challenges. Greater efforts must be made to enhance this comprehensive whole-of-system approach, and regional arrangements must be included at every step of the process. Mr. President, conflict prevention and resolution activities are most effective when they are complemented by targeted peace building and development initiatives that address the root causes of insecurity, improve lives and livelihoods, and bolster national ownership over peace processes. The norms and principles of sovereign equality, territorial integrity, and political independence ought always to serve as a guidepost for conflict prevention and resolution. In all situations, the mandates of regional organizations ought never to be subverted by hegemonic self-interest or eroded through unilateral action, but always to serve as platforms to enhance sovereignty and promote solidarity and cooperation. Still, Mr. President, none of these precepts ought ever to blind us to egregious abuse or violation of elemental human rights and the consequential need for appropriate collective action through the Security Council. Mr. President, I close respectfully with a reminder. Please help St. Vincent and the Grenadines
.7 FM, www.nbcsvg.com. We are the sound of the nation. You'll be listening to an address by Prime Minister the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves to the United Nations titled Enhancing Cooperation between United Nations and Regional Sub-Regional Organization in Enhancing Confidence Building and Dialogue in Conflict Prevention and Resolution. Of course, before that,